At the family Centennial, my grandfather raised his glass and roared, "Some bloodlines build. Others just follow the strong." His eyes landed right on me as the crowd cheered. I smiled politely, spent 30 years quietly buying every family asset behind shell companies. On the 100th anniversary of our fortune, I triggered a legal collapse so total that 5 generations lost everything overnight. Trusts dissolved, properties auctioned, names stripped from public records. In their place, a monument was built honoring the rebirth under new leadership. My name carved into stone forever. When I was 22, I stood at the edge of a ballroom in Louisville, Kentucky, holding a glass of champagne I didn't even want. It was supposed to be a celebration, 100 years since the Callahan family fortune began. But to me, it felt like a show I wasn't part of. My grandfather, Earl Callahan, stood on stage in front of more than 200 relatives. He wore his usual gray 3-piece suit, the same one he wore in every photo that hung in the family offices downtown. He looked over the crowd like a general surveying his troops. He raised his glass. "Some bloodlines build," he said, pausing for dramatic effect. "Others just follow the strong." Then he turned and stared straight at me. His eyes stayed locked on mine while everyone laughed and clapped like it was the most brilliant thing they'd ever heard. I smiled. Just enough so nobody would see what I really felt. I wasn't angry. Not yet. That came later. What I felt that night was quiet. Like I didn't belong. Like I was an outsider in my own bloodline. I was the accountant cousin, the one who didn't own a business, didn't have a horse ranch, didn't invest in real estate or wear custom suits. To them, I was background. To me, that moment was the start of something. I didn't want revenge at first. I just wanted distance. But over time that night kept coming back to me. His voice, that smug look, the way nobody questioned it, the way they all laughed at me without even knowing why. So I started planning. I kept working in finance. I stayed in the background. Nobody in the family cared what I did. As long as I showed up to weddings and holidays with a tie on. I started researching everything. Who owned what? Where the money flowed? What assets were tied up in trusts, which ones were vulnerable? I looked through public records, court filings, real estate databases, company registration documents. I built a map of the family empire. Most of the wealth was protected by old legal structures, legacy trusts, foundations, and shell companies set up decades ago. The family thought that meant it was secure forever. But most of them didn't understand how those systems worked. I did. And I learned how to get in through the side door. I started setting up my own shell companies in Delaware, Nevada, and the Caymans. Clean names. Boring paperwork. Nothing that would ever get noticed. Then I started acquiring. The first piece was small, a 40-acre piece of farmland in southern Indiana, tied up in one of my cousin's bankrupt LLCs. I bought it at auction through a company nobody could trace to me. Then a strip mall in Owensboro, once owned by the family, but now rented out and neglected. Then a timber lot. Then a crumbling apartment complex near downtown Louisville. All former Callahan properties. All forgotten by the rest of the family. All mine now. By 40, I controlled over a dozen assets they didn't even realize they'd lost. Then I moved closer to the core. The family horse ranch in Lexington, the one grandfather built in the 60s, went on the market after his death when the estate couldn't cover the taxes. My shell bought it within 48 hours. Nobody questioned it. The Callahan Foundation building downtown. I didn't buy it directly. I lent money to the group that eventually foreclosed on the trust that owned it. My shell acquired it later, at a fair market rate. They never saw my name. I waited. I collected. I stayed quiet. Every time one of them went through a divorce, or ran into debt, or sold off part of their holdings, I was there. Eventually, I owned more of the Callahan properties than any living Callahan. They still didn't know. I planned the reveal carefully. I chose the same ballroom. The Brown Hotel. Same stage, same chandeliers. But this time I only invited the core family. 26 people. When they arrived there were no name tags. No press.
No orchestra.
Just a black screen behind the podium. I walked up and waited for silence. Then I clicked the remote. A map appeared. Red lines and boxes. Each property highlighted, with the original Callahan name next to the new shell company name. I showed them how every trust had been quietly dissolved, how every safety net they believed in had been legally dismantled piece by piece. One of my uncles stood up and yelled, "This is a stunt. Where's your proof?" I showed the chain of documents, the transfers, the merger contracts, the dissolution records. All legal, all clean, all irreversible. Then I pulled up a list of auction notices scheduled to go live the next morning. Every property still technically under family control was already set for liquidation, either through foreclosure, tax seizure, or legal dissolution. Aunt Dora screamed and tried to come up to the stage. Security stopped her. I told them the truth, plain and simple. For 30 years, I watched you mock me, ignore me, and treat me like the quiet one in the corner. But I've been the one holding the knife the whole time. They were speechless. Not because they didn't believe it, but because they finally did. The next week, every Callahan business was either shut down or absorbed into one of my companies. The family name was removed from every title, plaque, and directory. The trust funds vanished. The offshore accounts were drained. Legally, through restructuring agreements they signed without reading. I took the family crest, that stupid silver eagle with the Latin motto, and had it engraved on a bench. That bench now sits in a memorial garden I built where the family mansion used to be. The garden is public. At the center is a black stone slab. No Callahan name. Just mine. The press caught on fast. A century-old family name vanishing overnight? It made headlines in Kentucky and spread to national outlets within days. The collapse of the Callahans. Old money, new owner. My name showed up in the news for the first time ever. Attached to words like genius, quiet power, the invisible heir. But not everyone was clapping. 2 weeks after the reveal, I got a call from my cousin Troy. He sounded calm, but I could tell he was holding back. "You think you won," he said. "You think tearing down the family makes you a king? You just made us desperate." I didn't answer. I let the silence stretch. He hung up. A week later I was served. A lawsuit, actually 5 of them, each from a different family member. Fraud. Coercion. Abuse of fiduciary duty. They threw every legal term they could find. I expected it. They were angry, humiliated, and they had nothing left but lawyers. They didn't know I'd been preparing for that too. I'd hired a firm 2 years earlier, one of the best in DC. I'd given them full access to everything. Every deal, every shell, every contract signed and notarized. Everything was above board. The lawsuits died in court before discovery even started. But it wasn't over. A month after the lawsuits failed, my office was broken into. Nothing was stolen, but someone had flipped every file drawer, every cabinet. They smashed my family photo, the only one I had from when I was 10, sitting next to my mother on the porch of the old estate. The police called it random. It wasn't. Someone wanted to rattle me. So I did what I'd done for the last 30 years. I stayed calm and got to work. I put cameras in every corner. I rotated security. I had every digital file double encrypted and backed up to servers in 3 cities. Then I called Troy. I told him calmly, "The next move you make, I'll take it personally." He tried to laugh. "You already did." "No," I said. "That was just business." Then I hung up. Few weeks passed. No more lawsuits. No more calls. I thought maybe it was over. Until a letter came in the mail. Handwritten. No return address. Inside was a single sheet of paper with one line. "Grandfather had a safe you never found." My stomach dropped. He did have a safe. I remembered him mentioning it once when I was a teenager. He called it the dead man's button. I'd never found any record of it, never saw it listed in the estate documents. But if it was real, what was in it? I hired a forensic team. They found an old floor plan of the Lexington ranch, the one I'd bulldozed. There was a crawl space under the library that wasn't on the final blueprint. I drove down there myself. The house was gone, just rubble and clean dirt. But the foundation was still there. I had my crew dig under what used to be the library. We found a rusted steel box bolted to the concrete slab. Inside, a collection of letters, a thumb drive, A single yellow legal pad with confession scrawled across the front. I read every word. It was my grandfather's handwriting, full of names, dates, accounts, and secrets. Real ones. Tax evasion. Bribery. At least 2 hush payments related to accusations I'd never heard about. One document suggested my grandfather was part of a cover-up involving a missing employee from 1987. If the press got hold of any of it, the Callahan name wouldn't just be erased, it'd be burned. I sat there in silence for a long time. Then I made a decision. I didn't shred it. I didn't leak it. I locked it in a climate-controlled vault under my new office downtown. Not because I wanted to protect them, I didn't. But because I wasn't done yet. They thought the fall of the empire was the end. But I was just getting started. 2 months after I found the vault under the old library, things started shifting in ways I didn't expect. First, my mother called me, which was rare. She'd always kept herself halfway out of family politics. But when I answered and heard the tremble in her voice, I knew this wasn't casual. "They've been coming by the house," she said. "Your uncles. Troy. Even Doris. Just standing in the yard. Not saying anything." I felt heat rise in my chest. My mother never asked me for help, even when she should have. But the way she said they, like she was scared, made something tighten inside me. I offered to send her away, fly her out west, but she refused. "I'm not running. Just do what you have to do." So I did. I paid a PI firm to track every move my remaining relatives made. Within a week, I had phone records, security footage, emails, everything. Most of them were broke, some on the verge of collapse, and one was caught trying to funnel family heirlooms into private auctions under false names. But the big twist came when one of the PIs, a woman named Layla, called me late one night. "I think you've got a leak," she said. "Inside your own structure." I froze. "Inside what?" "Your company's. One of your holding groups, Forsyth East LLC. A man named Davis Maddox was added as a managing partner 4 weeks ago. You didn't sign off on that, did you?" I had no idea who that was. She sent me the filing. It was real. It had my company's seal, but the signature wasn't mine. Someone was trying to claw their way back in through legal manipulation, using my own companies against me. I tracked it back and found a corporate lawyer I'd used 6 years ago. He'd retired 2 years ago. Or so I thought. Turns out he'd taken a consulting gig with a group of old money clients trying to build new assets. I confronted him. Calm at first. He stammered, swore he thought I'd given permission. I asked, "Who paid you?" He looked down and muttered, "Doris Callahan." So it wasn't over. Not even close. They were trying to rebuild. Quietly. Using stolen access and leftover legal tricks to force their way into my shell structure. But they didn't understand how deep I'd set the hooks. I restructured Forsyth East overnight. Fired everyone. Liquidated all assets under that name. Moved them to a new LLC under a trust in Wyoming with triple-level anonymity. Then I went on offense. I pulled every document I had from the safe under the library. Every confession, every shady deal, every name, every date. And I gave them one chance. I mailed a copy of a single letter, the one with the hush money and the name of the woman who'd gone missing in 1987, to every remaining member of the family. No note. Just the letter. They'd know I had the rest. And if they tried to come for me again, I'd go public. That should have been enough. But it wasn't. Troy didn't take the hint. He got bolder. He started showing up in public with reporters, giving half-truth interviews, acting like I'd betrayed a great legacy, that I'd robbed the family. It worked for some people. A local news piece painted him as the last true Callahan, clinging to tradition while a rogue cousin dismantled everything. It was laughable, but it was dangerous. I was suddenly in the spotlight. Investors started asking questions. Partners wondered if the legacy I'd wiped out was coming back to haunt the new empire. So I hit back. One final shot. I arranged a press conference. I stood behind a podium with clean lines, in front of the building I'd built where the old estate used to stand. I told the truth. I told the world about the fraud, the corruption, the legacy that wasn't honor, but silence and manipulation. Then I dropped the biggest twist I had. I named the woman from 1987, Angela M. Pierce. She hadn't died. She'd disappeared. Because my grandfather had paid her to. And I found her. She was 67 now, living in South Carolina. And she agreed to speak. The next day her interview aired. She talked about how she was 29, working in one of the Callahan factories, when she got pregnant. She said my grandfather had tried to buy her silence. When she refused, he threatened her. She vanished. Changed her name. Raised the child alone. She had documents, photos, bank receipts. Everything matched what I had in the vault. And the world listened. Suddenly, the Callahan legacy wasn't just gone, it was rotting. And no one came to its defense. After Angela's interview aired, everything changed. Whatever sympathy Troy had built up with the press disappeared overnight. Reporters stopped calling him a guardian of legacy and started calling him the grandson of a monster. He tried to deny it, tried to spin it, said Angela was a liar, said she was paid off. But then DNA results came in. Her son, 38 years old, a teacher in Georgia, was a Callahan by blood. And just like that, the story shifted again. Not only had my grandfather buried a scandal, he'd cut off his own blood, paid to erase them. While the rest of the family clinked glasses at galas and called themselves elite, a real Callahan grew up eating boxed cereal in a 2-bedroom apartment with no help and no last name. The world turned on them. I thought it would stop there. But it didn't. Angela's story opened the door. Within weeks, 2 more women came forward. One was a maid at the family estate in the 70s, another was an employee from the old textile mill. Both told stories of being used, threatened, and silenced. Each story lined up with documents I'd found in the vault. Each one landed like a hammer. By the time the second story hit, law enforcement started digging. The Callahan name, once too powerful to touch, was now wide open. Old tax records, bribery trails, even campaign donations to shady local judges. Within 3 months, Doris was indicted for perjury and obstruction. Troy was hit with a civil suit for corporate fraud. My Uncle Frank, who once bragged about being untouchable, was arrested for falsifying documents to cover up misused trust funds. They tried to run, tried to lie, tried to hide. It didn't work, because this time someone was paying attention. But the real twist? It came quietly. That teacher, Angela's son, his name was Micah. He reached out to me. At first I thought he wanted money, maybe revenge of his own. But that wasn't it. He asked to meet. We sat down in a small diner in Asheville, halfway between us. He wore a flannel shirt, had a quiet voice, and looked more like a guidance counselor than a Callahan. He said, "I know what they did to you. And I know what they did to my mom. I just want to understand. Why didn't you destroy all of it earlier?" I didn't have a perfect answer. Maybe I waited because I wasn't sure if I was right. Maybe I needed to make them watch as it all fell. Or maybe I was just afraid that if I ended them too fast, it wouldn't feel complete. He nodded like he understood. Then he said something I'll never forget. "You ended their legacy, but you left a path for the truth. That's what makes you different." A year passed. Most of the Callahan properties were sold or repurposed. The estate was gone. The company names were wiped. Their portraits were pulled from city buildings and museums. I even made a formal request to have the Callahan Hall plaque at the University of Kentucky removed. The board approved it unanimously. I donated the land the old mansion stood on to a nonprofit that helps survivors of workplace abuse. They turned it into a retreat center. Angela cut the ribbon at the opening. Micah stood beside her. I watched from the side, quietly. That night, I walked the path through the garden, past the benches, the trees, and the single stone monument that still stood at the center. The one that said, "The Rebirth under new leadership," and under it, my name. But this time, I added something. Beneath my name, in smaller letters, I had carved, "For the ones they erased, for the ones they called weak." I thought that would be the end. But there was one last knock at the door. It was from the IRS. Not for my family. For me. Turns out, one of the shell structures I'd used early on, one I'd set up through a second-party firm, had violated foreign asset reporting laws. A technicality, but a serious one. They wanted to audit everything. For the first time in years, I felt fear crawl up my spine. Not because I'd done anything wrong on purpose, but because I'd built so many layers, used so many tools that maybe I'd missed something. The audit took 6 months. It was brutal. My name was dragged through papers. My face on cable news. They called me a financial saboteur. A shadow heir. Some even suggested I'd done it all for personal gain, not justice. For a while I believed maybe they were right. Then the report came back.
No fraud. No embezzlement.
No crimes. Just a fine, a hefty one for improper disclosure. I paid it the next day. The storm passed. And I was still standing. Now I'm 53. I live in a small house outside Lexington.
No mansión.
No staff. I still work quietly, this time for good. I run a foundation in Angela's name that provides legal help for workers who can't afford it. Micah sits on the board. The Callahan name? It's gone from every sign, every title, every building. But I didn't just take it down. I replaced it with something better. I didn't follow the strong. I outlasted them. And when it was over, I made sure the world remembered who truly built something worth keeping. Not with their money. With their mistakes.